First, be master of the situation. Second, be master of the patient. Unless this superiority is established, all treatment will be in vain. It's not the medical model, see, which a term I never use, by the way, but I don't want to confuse you. It's a pediatric model. It's domination that's the key here, not treatment. Keep in mind that no doctor can treat you without your consent, unless you are declared crazy. So it's all psychiatry. It's not medicine. Especially today, you can't go to a doctor or go to a hospital without signing 20 forms before they let you in. They're all consent forms. Don't sign it, okay, leave. Heinroth was not satisfied with the justification of torture as treatment. He proclaimed the medical profession's monopolistic control over the study and treatment of mental illness. Excuse me. He wrote, since we are speaking of medical art and science, we should think that nobody but a doctor should have a right to make mental disturbance the object of his study and treatment. It is a duty of the state to care for mentally disturbed persons whenever they are a burden to the community or present a public danger. Now this view, this totalitarian view as I call it, is not right-wing, it's not left-wing. It's both. It's ordinary political language, it's called statism. State is a new God. And just read the New York Times any day, or any other paper for that matter, and you'll get this interpretation. Look at television. Interestingly, in France, similar ideas, actually identical ideas, were advanced by the Jacobins. Now I hope you know who the Jacobins were. Pinel's magnum opus, in English, Medical Philosophical Treatise of Mental Alienation or Mania, was published in 1801. 1801, now keep your date in mind, and quickly became enormously influential both in Europe and the US. In the English edition, you read, quotes, if the madman is met, however, by a force evidently and convincingly superior, he submits without opposition or violence. In the preceding cases of insanity, we trace the happy effects of intimidation without severity, of oppression without violence, and for this purpose, the straight waistcoat, the straitjacket, will generally be found amply sufficient. To effect and expedite a permanent cure, unlimited power in the choice of adoption of curative measures were given to his medical attendant. End of quote. Now this is not the kind of medical history that's generally presented. I don't know why not. Pinel has become sanctified as the man who struck the chains of the mental patient. All the pictures, I mean, this is historical propaganda. It's like the idea that there was sort of, I don't want to pick on my chosen country, which is still probably better than most others, but you know, there was never any slavery. You know, everybody was always slavery. But anti-slavery was being a crime, was a crime. There were fugitive slave acts. If you were a free man in the North and had harbored a slave, you were a criminal. In the United States, the credit or blame for creating the state mental hospital system belongs to Dorothea Dix. I don't want to go through this, I will skip this. I hope you know this story. But this is when the state took over the care of the mental patient. There's a very interesting statement, long statement by President Pierce, just before the Civil War, in which he rejected a bill which passed both houses of Congress, which allotted land, which is what Dorothea Dix and mad doctors wanted, for the care of mental patients, where they, you know, grew vegetables and were enslaved in these plantations for whites, mainly in those days. And he vetoed it on the ground by saying that nowhere in the Constitution does it say that the care of mental patients is a part of the federal government's job. How do you like that for the will of the founder's intent? What was the founder's intent? In my days, it was still not the federal government's job. I graduated from medical school in 1944. Long time ago, obviously, I'm in my 90s. The center of psychiatry in those days was a state mental hospital system. Now, how come it's called state mental hospital? Have you thought of that? We had state hospitals and we had medical hospitals. But who ran the medical hospitals? The community and the various churches. There were Jewish hospitals, Catholic hospitals, Protestant hospitals. There were no atheist hospitals, as far as I know. After President Johnson, I was already middle-aged, when this became all federalized, called Medicare, Medicaid. And now we live as though there was, if the federal government doesn't pay for it, who will? Well, who pays the bill for this hotel or for the movies? Chewing gum. Like children, we are anything that's important, the state should pay for. Education and health care. Two most important things in the world. And we wouldn't think of it that people should pay for it. Oh, my goodness. I don't pay for it when I go to a doctor. No means testing. Nobody talks about means testing. But nobody talks about the basic issues of who should cover this. Now, I will skip over. I have some comments here about Lang, and he has always endorsed, not always, but when he talked about it, he actually endorsed involuntary mental hospitalization. I have the quote for you if you want it. Because I'm also constantly, this anti-psychiatry being anti-coercion is completely wrong. Anti-psychiatry is for coercion, but only for mental patients. You want to be sure that you're not sane. This was an error of the Rosenhan. If it's so bad for mental patients, how come it's so good for non-mental patients? What? Now, more recently, in 1999 actually, this now brings us up to date, almost. A collection of British psychiatrists organized a group they called Critical Psychiatry Network, CPN. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, ever heard of it. I know a few of you have, but generally nobody raises his hand. This is a fairly important movement there. And its objection, it is dedicated to challenging, and I quote again the words, challenging the stranglehold of the biomedical approach within the psychiatric profession, end of quote. Now that's interesting, because I thought I had done just that a long time ago. Not according to Duncan Double, very nice man, the National Health Service consultant psychiatrist, one of the leaders of the network. He wrote, quotes, Szasz goes too far to my mind in arguing that society can manage without any mental health law, end of quote. For thousands of years, society have managed perfectly well without mental health laws. So patently, this is nonsensical statements. Double seeks to liberate psychiatry from its anatomical medical bonds. And be careful where you go with this. Make it a more explicitly political form of social control. And I quote again Double. And this is typical of the view of this group. Critical psychiatry sees itself as an advance over anti-psychiatry. Advance over, again, anti-psychiatry. What has it got to do with anti-psychiatry? In the sense that it accepts the social role of a psychiatric practice. For example, the Critical Psychiatry Network, I'm still quoting, concerned about the government's proposal to reform the Mental Health Act are based on ethical reasons and linked to its critique of the explanatory model of mental illness, not rejection of the need for the Mental Health Act itself. In essence, critical psychiatry argues, and listen carefully because this actually concerns the kind of opposition that we all tend to be engaged in. Critical psychiatry argues that psychiatric practice does not have to justify itself by postulating brain pathology as a basis for mental illness. Now, this is the most dangerous thing at all. So this is completely divorcing itself from medicine and thinking we can do it because we know something mystical, religious, about who is mentally ill and who should be locked up. That's the bottom line here. Now, I have similar quotes from another leading from Pat Bracken and critical psychiatrist. Members of the CPN, of the Critical Psychiatry Network, like many American counterparts, criticize the proliferation of psychiatric diagnoses and the excessive emphasis use of psychotropic drugs, but explicitly embrace psychiatric coercions. To be sure, supporting such a stance, even to the minimal extent of insisting on a clear-cut economic, legal, and political separation between private voluntary and public involuntary psychiatric interventions would have incalculable consequences of the lives of mental health professionals as well as on everyone else's. But how this is changed, this system is changed, impacts all of us very directly. The Critical Psychiatry Network's position is not, in my view, psychiatric criticism at all. It is a plea for what I have long called prettifying the psychiatric plantations. Psychiatrists either have the right to forcibly molest persons, which they call treatment, they call patients by calling it medical treatment, or they do not have such a right. And when people say black and white and it's either or, well, some things are either or. You are either arrested or you're not arrested. You are either sitting here or you are sitting in jail. Now, the inability, the impotence of this kind of criticism is illustrated by a law passed in the United Kingdom in 2007, which has been widely mentioned. I am quoting from the papers. The UK government in 2007 established, quotes, a shadowy new, lest you think America has problems, new national anti-terrorist unit. Again, the key words, anti-terrorist unit, to protect VIPs, I am quoting directly, with the power to detain suspects indefinitely using mental health laws. The team's psychiatrists and psychologists then have the power to order treatment, including forcibly detaining suspects in secure psychiatric units. Using these powers, the unit can legally detain people for an indefinite period without trial, without criminal charges, or without even evidence of a crime being committed. Increasing fears, the line is being blurred between criminal investigation and the doctor's clinical decisions. National Health Service documents obtained by the Mail on Sunday reveal the unit's role concerns identification and diversion into psychiatric care of mentally ill people fixated on the prominent people, VIPs. The center, which is based at a secret central London location, has a staff of 4 police officers, 2 civilian researchers, a forensic psychiatrist, a forensic psychologist, and a forensic community mental health nurse. Research led to the Fixated Threat Assessment Center, which is what this is called, being set up with a £500,000 budget from the Home Office and the Department of Health. National Health Service documents say it is, quote, a prototype for future joint services. Well, this is where we are. whether it's John Hinckley or whether it's a man in Tucson who killed a lot of people, they all end up in mental hospitals. And then psychiatrists say we shouldn't stigmatize people, and people at large, and then the APE, and all the APEs have whole groups about not stigmatizing people. But at the same time, this is where they get their money. This is where they get their power. This is where they get their jobs. Now, what about contemporary American critical psychiatry? Now I'm coming to my end and to the most controversial part. American objections to mad doctoring range widely, from old-fashioned protests against false commitment, especially in cases of so-called insanity acquittees. You see, that claim that you are being falsely railroaded has sort of disappeared from you. But now there is an argument when somebody is acquitted by not reason of insanity, like all these women who killed their children in Florida, how long should they be kept? Are they still crazy? Have they been cured? Well, they are still working on a federal. Best psychiatrists have been working for more than 30 years on Hinckley, and he's still dangerous to himself and others, locked up. John Hinckley, I don't know how many of you even remember what happened then. All of these opponents claim to treat, I'm listing a whole group of them, unorthodox or medical treatments like molecular psychiatry and so on, ranging from the practice of so-called orthomolecular psychiatrists to the practices of so-called anti-psychiatrists, and a plethora of other promoters of what they call ethical, empathic, or other kinds of psychotherapies, you know, and there is no end to them. All of these practitioners or advocates claim to treat mental diseases whose existence they acknowledge or deny as suits their economic interests. Some assert that patients are not ill, just different. Others reject the role of psychiatric critic, call themselves reformers, quite openly, reformers, and testify under oath in both civil and criminal prosecutions that mental illnesses caused by psychotropic drugs are caused by psychotropic, and exonerate the drug taker of criminal responsibility for his offense. And the psychiatrist becomes responsible. You know this whole story. Still others are evasive about what, if anything, is, quote, wrong with mental patients, and resort to self-promotion by name-calling competitors' practices unethical, toxic, or whatever, and their own practices ethical and therapeutic. None of this is right. None of these parasites of the public psychiatric system support themselves by serving the needs of private persons willing to pay for private help to better cope with their private personal problems. This is a very old-fashioned argument I'm making. There is a difference between the private sphere and the public sphere. From a contractarian, libertarian point of view, all contemporary psychiatric criticisms are misdirected. If a person is law-abiding, he and he alone should have the authority and power over his relations with others. John Stuart Mill. Straight copy. No one should be able to do anything to him or for him without his consent for any reason whatever. End of argument.